So these 4 agents of socialization that I've discussed are extremely important to keep in mind. Now, a few other concepts that we need to discuss in regards to socialization is resocialization and total institutions. Resocialization occurs even if it is against somebody's will. When there's some kind of socializing agent deliberately trying to cause somebody to reevaluate or reform their values and their roles and their self-concept. Essentially, the basis of resocialization is that if you can learn something, you can unlearn it. This may be severe, it may be quite mild. As I'm speaking about this, I'm thinking I had a conversation with somebody who has tried to quit smoking several times. And we discussed how even once the physical withdrawal is done, that it's a habit for them. That it's almost like they have to relearn how to live every day without a cigarette. In the previous chapter based on culture, I talked about what it must be like for somebody to move to a different country, that they go through a certain amount of culture shock. Gradually, the culture shock lessens and they begin to take on at least some of the cultural elements of the new country. They begin to assimilate to a minimal degree. Another way of looking at this is they have to go through resocialization to become accustomed to the ways that things are done in their own country. Not just in terms of learning a new language, but probably how they dress, what they eat, maybe how they socialize and interact with other people. There can be positive and negative examples of resocialization. You know, this just is me, but I always automatically picture somebody who is a member of a cult and their family members have hired people to snatch them back because they've been brainwashed by the cult, and now they have to undergo resocialization to kind of undo the brainwashing that took place. But I also watched a lot of really bad movies of the week in the 1980s, so that's probably why when I think of resocialization, that's the first thing that comes to mind. However, on a much more serious note, if you look at Canada's residential school system, when First Nations children were forced to attend, sometimes forcibly physically removed from their homes for years at a time, this was in part an attempt to resocialize the children, to make them as white as possible, embrace their traditional Indigenous ways of doing things and their Indigenous perspective of the world and their Indigenous culture. It was an attempt to resocialize First Nations children. Resocialization, whether you realize it or not, is what occurs when a person joins the military and goes through basic training. An extremely, extremely intensive process that puts new recruits through both physical and psychological training that is designed to prepare them for a life in the military. Obviously, it's a live-in program. You're there 24 hours a day, and it can last several weeks or several months. And again, it isn't just getting these recruits ready for the physical demands of being in the military, it's also getting them used to the social norms of the military. Obeying orders immediately without thinking about it and without question. Maybe potentially harming or killing another person. All of these things are involved. I apologize if you heard a meow there. It's because my cat, who tends to be very pushy, just hopped up beside me. So it's an extremely, extremely intensive process. Their attitudes are reshaped according to a military perspective. Their behaviors and habits are shaped according to a military life. So psychological conditioning is extremely important and actively employed to get recruits to at least partially suppress their individuality. Not just because it needs to happen, but for the good of their unit, for their fellow soldiers, for everybody. And you could really go into a lot of detail studying exactly how this conditioning or resocialization is done in basic training, actively using different kinds of conditioning techniques. So think about the very start of it. When boot camp begins, usually outsiders make a big deal about the fact that they have to shave their heads. These are the pictures you always see in movies. These are the pictures you always see online. This is part of the process. Is there a purpose to this? Absolutely there is. When basic training begins, several things occur or are put in place, and the environment is structured so that these new recruits are all in, so to speak, right from the very beginning. From the very start of boot camp, even their right to quit is restricted. A person can't just give up easily and walk away. In fact, it might be outright denied. So if you want to drop a course, you drop a course. But that can't happen. So shaving their head, having them wear all exactly the same uniforms, taking away all privacy by sleep in dorms, and share the same public bathrooms, and even not using first names but only referring to them by their last name, all actively work to suppress their identity as an individual. Every single second of every single day is tightly controlled. There's no variation from routine for anybody, no matter what. And everybody is forced to do everything exactly the same, even if it's making their bed and folding their clothes. Any variation from this results in punishment. So when you think of resocialization, the military really is the most extreme example. And I haven't even commented yet on how recruits are sometimes purposely deprived of sleep or food or shelter. Now, there are less extreme examples of resocialization, but still very serious ones, such as when somebody joins a fraternity or a sorority or a sports team. Now, often part of the resocialization of these involves an initiation ritual, a ritual signifying the transition of the individual from one group to another, and this also helps to kind of cement their loyalty to the group. Now, in fraternities and sororities, this is referred to as hazing, or on sports teams, when new students who are already members of the fraternity or sorority or the team purposely inflict some kind of mental or physical torment or both. So maybe the new recruits, who are called pledges, are deprived of sleep or forced to sit or stand in one position for a long period of time, or forced to go for runs in the middle of the night. If you look at the screen here, the guys in the white tank tops and the orange shorts, those are Hooters uniforms. They have to complete some kind of prank or something like that. So, for example, snipe hunt is one kind of prank that cannot be completed, but it's given to the pledges anyways. So the pledges are given a task to do that cannot be completed. So kind of harmless snipe hunts are that they have to find a brass magnet when brass is not magnetic. So they're forced to run some kind of fool's errand or a wild goose chase. And it's kind of silly and funny because no harm comes to anybody. And you know, the people who are already members know that it can't be completed. So you have them in Hooters uniforms, or on the top left in a prisoner's uniform, or you have the guys dress up as girls, something like that. However, in the last few decades in particular, hazing has made the news because of when it has become much more serious and harmful. Sometimes pledges are outright abused physically. They are openly humiliated publicly. They're forced to drink large amounts of alcohol, no matter how the pledge can handle it, or all of the above. So previous reports of hazing include things like covering pledges in food, even urinating on them, before hosing them off with freezing cold water while they're outside completely naked. They may have their entire body shaved or written on with permanent marker, or in one report I read, they were actually tattooed with something. They may be paddled or spanked. They may have to clean up a mess deliberately made by the other members that consists of urine and fecal matter with nothing more than their bare hands and a toothbrush. And it's because of this that hazing rituals have made the news for often tragic reasons. And I want to be clear here, this is not just kind of your stereotypical partying, drinking, doing something stupid. This can really, really be harmful. And this is why hazing is actually prohibited by law in several areas. Or if it's not prohibited by law where people live, then the specific college or university outlaws it. But this doesn't mean it doesn't continue to occur. So unfortunately, I only have American statistics. But in one of the largest U.S. national surveys regarding hazing, they surveyed 60,000 student athletes. So I want you to keep your research methods in mind. 60,000 is a great large sample size. And this was in 1998 to 1999. Of the 60,000, more than a quarter of them experienced some form of hazing to join the athletic team. 1 in 5 of the 60,000 was subjected to unacceptable and potential illegal hazing, meaning they were kidnapped, physically hit, tied up, or abandoned somewhere. And maybe they were forced to commit crimes, whether it's destroying property, prank phone calls, or harassing other people. Of the 60,000, half were required to participate in a drinking contest related to hazing. 2/3 of the 60,000 were subjected to humiliating hazing, such as being yelled or sworn at, forced to wear embarrassing clothing or no clothing at all, or they were forcefully deprived of sleep or food. Now, I'm going to refer to one specific case to show you just how much this hazing culture can get out of control. And this is a fairly recent case. In 2017, a young man named Tim Piazza, who was only 19, died at Pennsylvania State University as a result of hazing. This is not the first death as a result of hazing in the United States. I want you to be aware of that. He pledged a fraternity house, and while he was undergoing hazing rituals in his fraternity, he drank enormous amounts of alcohol in a short period of time because that's what he was expected to do. And this was part of an obstacle course that the fraternity called the Gauntlet. And what this did was it required each pledge to drink from a bottle of vodka, drink a beer, and then drink wine. And there's a few other factors that unfortunately played into this, one of which Mr. Piazza was drinking on an empty stomach, which is never a good idea. And in addition, he took antidepressants, which likely affected how the alcohol affected him. In this state, he fell down the basement stairs of the house. This is actually a fraternity house, not one of your rundown, icky fraternity houses. He fell down the basement stairs of the house and he knocked himself unconscious. Now, the fraternity had security cameras in their house, and what the tapes on the camera showed was that some of the fraternity members carried him to a couch. You can see on the couch, I guess his shirt was somehow pulled up. You can see a bruise forming, apparently, on the tape. And you could see that one of the fraternity members tried to get against the others that they needed to call help for him, but this was ignored. And believe it or not, it gets worse from here. After a period of time, Mr. Piazza regained consciousness and rolled off the couch. And at this point, 3 of the fraternity brothers picked him up, kind of slammed him back on the couch. That's the word that's used. They were trying to slap him in the face to wake him up, hit him in the stomach, and they poured beer on him, but he remained completely unresponsive. And eventually he rolled off the couch again and kind of curled into his body in a fetal position. The next morning, Mr. Piazza regained consciousness and tried to get up, but he fell backwards. And he repeatedly tried to get up and fell back down. Once he was able to get his balance, he staggered towards the lobby area of the house, where he fell again, and he unfortunately fell into an iron railing and landed on a stone floor, which likely caused serious head trauma. He then tried to get up and tried again to reach the front door, but fell into it and was unconscious. One more time he tried to go down to the basement, but he fell down again, and he remained at the base of the stairs until several of the fraternity brothers discovered him several hours later, cold to the touch and breathing rapidly. So this case resulted in one of the largest hazing prosecutions in the United States, garnered enormous media attention, not just because of what occurred, but also because it was clearly determined that despite observing Tim had very serious injuries, the fraternity brothers waited nearly 12 hours before calling for medical assistance. This is a picture of some of the fraternity brothers who were charged. 18 were charged in connection with his death, 8 with involuntary manslaughter, and the rest with other offenses, including hazing. And then the fraternity itself at the university was charged. And you know, one of the main questions regarding this incident or hazing overall is why would somebody ever consider joining any kind of organization that participates in this sort of thing? Why would they subject themselves to it? And the answer to that is because membership is in the group is important to them for whatever reason. And that necessarily requires this initiation rite. Separating your old identity and status, maybe being degraded, maybe disorientation and stress, but then you're accepted into this new group and this group culture and you have a new status. So a person in a way is broken down to be built back up as a member of that group. They are re-socialized, whether it is the military or a fraternity or maybe some kind of religious cult. Now, what happened with the fraternity brothers is the vast majority of charges were actually dropped. And this happened in 2018 that they were dropped. There's maybe 3 fraternity members who are still before the courts. Couldn't quite think of the right term, but they're only charged with things like alcohol offenses, really nothing to do with Mr. Piazza's death. So hazing overall, hazing rituals have come under increased scrutiny for a few decades now. And every few years, a new tragic case will make the news, not always involving a fatality, but sometimes it does. And rightly so, universities and colleges are beginning to take a much more serious attitude towards this kind of activity. Now, resocialization is also very common in total institutions, and a total institution is a place where people are pretty much isolated from larger society, such as a boot camp, military training. They're under strict control, and they are really highly supervised by staff. So a total institution, for example, a private boarding school is something like a total institution, although these days students do have the ability to be in contact with people outside the school with their phones. But they are living in one area, where they live, where they sleep, what they eat, when they eat, usually what they wear is highly controlled by the staff in a private school.